Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Chris Ott, the Deputy Director of the High-Speed Rail Alliance. I'm filling in today for our Executive Director, Rick Harnish. And I'm also here with Dylan Hayward, our Program Manager, and of course, our guest speaker, who I'll introduce in a little bit more detail in just a couple of minutes. Before then, just wanted to tell anyone who is new to this webinar about the High-Speed Rail Alliance. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to being the best source of information about what high-speed rail is, including the benefits that it brings and how it integrates with other forms of transportation. We also support elected officials and other local leaders working to achieve this. We're a membership organization, so if you believe in the importance of this work, please hit the donate button at our site, highspeedrail.us. But today, the real discussion focuses on the city of Boston. And this is a city that has a long history with rail. Boston built the first American subway line, and it also serves as an intercity rail hub for a multi-state area. But as in a lot of other North American cities, Boston's network needs modernization, and it needs a regional rail approach. Regional rail is an important concept for the Alliance. Regional rail means running trains frequently on schedules that are easy to remember, like every 15 minutes, to serve many types of people traveling throughout a region, not just people commuting to and from a downtown for work. And the organization that we'll hear from today, TransitMatters, advocates for regional rail in Boston. They envision a new business model that is centered around transforming the region's commuter rail network into a modern electric network to bring that kind of frequent and reliable service to the entire Metro Boston region. This would be transformative, and we invited TransitMatters to present today because their work is such a good model for other commuter rail networks looking to make that switch to a regional rail system. And our speaker today is Jared Johnson, the Executive Director of TransitMatters. Living in Boston, he has embraced a car-free lifestyle and knows how vital the MBTA, the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority, is to the lives of so many people in the region and to the New England economy. He is working with advocates and allies around the region to get the MBTA to consider the bigger picture and to make bold, meaningful investments and make regional rail a reality. So if you have a comment during the course of the talk today, please put that in the chat. If you have a question, please use Zoom's Q&A feature. That'll help us just to sort of keep things separate. And we'll have a question and answer period after the talk and get to as many of the questions as we can. With that, Jared, thank you for being here, and please take it away.
Get that mute button off. Awesome. Yes, thanks for inviting me, and I'm really excited to talk about regional rail and talk about sort of the intersection between regional rail and high-speed rail. So let me get these. That's always the fun part of the Zoom. Get the screen share going. All right. There we go. All right, so here to talk about modernizing commuter rail, regional rail, and sort of how it relates to high-speed rail. So TransitMatters, we're a transportation advocacy group based here in Boston, and really more recently we've really been thinking about how interconnected the entire state is, and so really we've recently been really thinking about our vision statewide, and so now we're really transitioning to thinking about the state and the entire region. But to keep it simple, we just like to say that we're people focused and data driven. So I'll talk a little bit more about sort of what regional rail is, and really we've sort of distilled it down to 5 really key points. So that is fast, modern electric trains that are much more reliable, high level platforms that not only make it easier for passengers with disabilities, but also speed up boarding for everyone, and remove the need for folks to go up and down stairs, and really thinking about how not only do these things benefit wheelchair users, but benefit parents with strollers, our seniors, or anyone with a temporary disability, and then of course very relevant to high-speed rail, to folks who are traveling with bags. Also thinking about strategic infrastructure investment. So looking at where are there single track segments, where are there level crossings or at grade junctions where trains have to pass in front of each other, and removing those things that slow down service and impact reliability. And also looking at new stations that expand access. And one of the things that's really really prevalent in Boston, and is really prevalent around the country and around North America when it comes to commuter rail, is the fact that it often bypasses inner city communities that are not only communities that are rapidly changing and adding new jobs and whole new neighborhoods popping up there, but that also bypass minority and low-income communities. And so it's also about thinking, how can we add infill stations to expand access? And as Chris said, it's about frequent all-day service, and having a service that folks can sort of turn up and go. And so in a lot of the more dense areas and in closer in areas, that service every 15 minutes or better, but definitely service every 30 minutes, even out at some of the far ends of the system. And it's also integrating into the local transit for that first mile, last mile. And so making sure that whether it's the subway and the light rail in downtown Boston, or the regional buses outside of the city, that transition is as easy as possible. And then also thinking about cheaper fares. The way that commuter rail has traditionally been set up, it's really been targeted for folks working, high-paying white-collar jobs that needed to get into the city at a very specific time. And so, it was a lot less price sensitive. But coming into this stage of the return to work and the pandemic, it's clear that model is extremely vulnerable, and that we need to really think about how we're making all forms of transit accessible to folks, and not sort of having not class segmenting out transit. And then one of the things that we also that we talk about is that this is about more than just faster trains. There are really benefits across society, and whether that is, again, thinking about how we open up access for people with disabilities, and what impact that has to to the state budgets and to their mobility. There are a lot of places where folks with disabilities have to rely on paratransit, which has to be booked well in advance, and really really doesn't allow them to have full access and mobility, and is also extremely expensive for transit agencies and for the state. And so this really unlocks those benefits. Regional rail is also about economic growth. One of the things that we make sure to talk about when we talk about regional rail and providing access to what we in Massachusetts call our gateway cities, and these are post-industrial mid-sized cities that were once the gateway for European American immigrants, that are now home to sizable Dominican immigrant populations, and Cape Verdean populations, and the largest population of Cambodian immigrants outside of California. We talk about how regional rail is not just about getting folks from those communities into downtown Boston as quickly as possible, but it's also about spurring economic development and getting folks to go there to visit the museums and visit the rich cultural activities that are there, and to think about how entrepreneurs, local entrepreneurs there, can take advantage of that cheaper office space, and how some of the next innovations can come from those communities, and how they can not only tap into the local talent, but also have people reverse commuting from Boston. And of course, the environmental benefits are huge, not just in removing the local source of pollution in the diesel trains themselves, but also mode shift, and that right at this moment, right now, rail electrification is the only transit electrification that really has the impact of dramatically improving service, and really making that service much more attractive and getting folks off the road. Housing is another huge benefit to regional rail. So thinking about how, if all of a sudden we open up significantly more communities that are 45 minutes away from downtown Boston, which there are many neighborhoods in the city of Boston that are have longer trips than that. And if we have that kind of turn up and go service, you all of a sudden start really opening up a lot more communities for housing. And Massachusetts actually recently passed a bill that's requiring all of the cities and towns with regional rail service, with commuter rail service, to zone for multifamily housing. And so some of that is already being recognized, but really we think that faster, more reliable transit is really that key to turning that zoning permission and that planning for affordable housing, for more housing, including more affordable housing, into the actual development of that. And then, of course, the workforce development potential of regional rail is really astounding. I think our estimate is around is more than 125,000 jobs, in the construction and in the management, the development of the rail network itself, and then a similar number of folks who will have jobs because of the economic activity spurred by that investment in regional rail. Again, this is really one of the things that is really going to be transformative is thinking about just how much more frequency and reliability that regional rail is going to open up. And so there's so many places where right now, and this graph is from the schedule, in 2022, 2023. And so some of these places had even longer waits between trains before the pandemic. But when you think about having a train every 8 minutes from some of these communities, that's almost subway-like service, and so it's really going to be transformative for these communities. One of the other things that's also again really key about regional rail is that we've got to have a system that is actually affordable and that is far simpler. One of the jokes that I make is that oh, actually, here, I'll get to that in a moment. But a really key example of how important lower fares are is that Lynn is a city that's about 9 miles north of Boston. It's about 125,000 people. It's one of those gateway cities that I talked about earlier. A sizable immigrant population from all over Central and South America. But it's also in a community with, there's a great deal of poverty there. And so despite the fact that 2/3 of the residents within walking distance from downtown Lynn Station are low income, before COVID, they only made up 7% of that ridership. And so not only did that deprive them of a faster, more enjoyable ride into town, it also meant that we used buses that could have been used, for local service in Lynn and all over the region. We used buses to parallel a train line. And so that's something that we've got to, that we have to use our resources much more effectively. And so, regional rail also has that benefit as well. And sorry, what I was going to say earlier is the phrase I often talk about is that, we hear people talk about, running government like a business all the time. But when you go into McDonald's, there's not a 12-step process for ordering a hamburger, and with vastly different fees depending on what you get. And so one of the other proposals that we have is that we need to not only have cheaper fares overall, in addition to having low-income fares for low-income residents, we need to have dramatically cheaper and simpler fares. Right now, we have a 12-zone system with intrazone fares, so there are 24 different prices depending on where you're going, and that is just far too much. And so we really, if we're going to have the massive mode shift that we're talking about, we need to make transit cheaper and significantly simpler. And we think that when you implement this with regional rail, that is lower cost to operate in terms of having less people to run the trains, and having a lower maintenance cost. We think that this combined with the service increases, you're going to spur more ridership, and then even though you're charging less, you're actually going to make more revenue. And even beyond that, obviously the goal of transit is to move people, not about making money. All right. And so the reason why this is so important again is that we really have to think about what is the new paradigm. what is the new paradigm post-COVID? Commuter rail riders are some of the folks that have the most flexible schedules. One of the things that was really stark is at the beginning of the pandemic, commuter rail ridership dropped somewhere between 95 and 99%. Obviously, it's recovered, quite a bit, but that's because commuter rail has traditionally been marketed towards people who have access to a car, people who are who work in jobs that were very easy in most cases to go remote. And so even though a lot of those folks have come back, it really shows the danger in having such a not resilient system. In Boston and in many places, traffic is back to the pre-pandemic levels. Even if it's spread out a little bit more, it still is really still is back back to normal for all intents and purposes. And then also, the pandemic changed a lot of patterns, and really the folks who are traveling in the evenings, traveling in the middle of the day, and in the weekends, those are the segments that are returning fastest, whether it's on the bus, whether it's on commuter rail, or whether it is on subway. And so really thinking about how do we move away from this, this very peak oriented structure that, again, not only is extremely, vulnerable as we saw, but also leaves so many people behind, leaves third shift workers behind, leaves working parents behind. And how do we move? How do we make sure that transit is actually responding to the ways that people are moving, that we're already starting to change before COVID, but have really been accelerated. Again, that the traffic congestion in Boston is astronomical, and one of the things that TransitMatters is also doing, in addition to thinking about how are we doing more advocacy statewide, and how are we thinking about ourselves in that broader context, we're also thinking about how do we more closely join, how do we more closely think about the environment and environmental justice, and thinking about how simply replicating this picture we see now with electric vehicles is not sustainable. And that's where regional rail, that's where high-speed rail really has to come into play. And so again, this is just showing how, even as early as last year, already back to normal, and in some places even a little bit worse. One of the other reasons why regional rail is so critical is that in Massachusetts, the Boston commuter rail network really is the backbone of the state's rail network. And so, right now there are conversations about, extending service out to Cape Cod full time. And how do we do that? There's talk about running service along the north central part of the state and extending past Fitchburg and going out to North Adams in the northwestern corner. Of course, there's the talk about having more service between Boston and Springfield and points west. There's always been talk about the Capitol Corridor, and so really investing in the MBTA's commuter rail network is really key to having statewide connectivity. And so investments, every minute that's saved between Boston and Worcester is also time that's saved between Boston and Springfield. And so that's the other way that we talk about this, is that, sometimes there can be this east versus west dynamic in the state and tension. And so we really think about regional rail as a way to really bridge that gap, and to either make a down payment on services that may come in the future, and unlock those bottlenecks that would make having full-time service to Cape Cod more difficult, or making that down payment in electrifying the line between Boston and Providence, and the branch line there, so that we can have faster trains from Fall River and New Bedford, and to fully deliver on the state's promise to that, to those communities. And it's also about projects outside of the state of Massachusetts. These are different proposals, some of various levels various levels of realisticness in the short term, but the work that we do on upgrading the line between Boston and Providence is key to the future of the Northeast Corridor, no matter what, whether we go with the Amtrak plans or whether that we look at some of these more ambitious plans. Upgrading the line between Boston and Worcester is key to the inland route and the upgrades there and adding that resilient corridor. It's key to higher speed service to Portland, or higher speed service to Montreal, or future high speed service to Montreal. And so I'll talk a little bit more about this as well, and about how we're already seeing examples of that around the country, about how regional rail and high speed rail really are connected. So again, coordination and access. And this graphic on the right will look familiar. It's actually from High Speed Rail Alliance. But in California, we've already seen that the California High Speed Rail project, that Caltrain, the commuter rail agency there in the Bay Area, worked with California High Speed Rail and got some of those funds early, even though the segment between the Central Valley and the Bay Area, even though it's going to be a while before that is completed, they use those funds to electrify that corridor and modernize that corridor. And so again, we already see how regional rail and high speed rail can work together. And sometimes there can be a tension with communities worried about the construction impacts and all of these things from a high speed rail project. And so working with the local transit agency to figure out, where can that infrastructure that's being built for high speed rail, where can that complement efforts to improve, local transit. Actually, I didn't put this in the slides, but a really interesting example is actually in Japan, where in upgrading and extending one of the Shinkansen lines, the local community was quite upset because since it's a quite densely packed area, the train line was really going to have to be slotted through there, and there were going to have to be building takedowns. There's going to have to be quite a bit of disruption, and there was just not a plan to add more than I think one station in that area. And so they worked with the local transit agency and actually built an automated people mover line that is actually, I think, cantilevered or attached to the Shinkansen viaduct to provide local service there. So there's all sorts of really creative ways to think about how high-speed rail and not only either regional rail or other sort of local connectivity can come into play. And this image on the right is about how the investments on the other end from the California High-Speed Rail project are going to upgrade Los Angeles Union Station and upgrade some of the corridors that Metrolink uses as they think about their future modernization efforts and as they think about transitioning to a regional rail model. One of the other things that's really critical about why regional rail is so important is, I'm sure most of you have seen this graphic or some version of this graphic, but it talks about where high-speed rail is really competitive. And so obviously the distance is one that we talk about a lot, but the door-to-door time is really important too. And so if we can think about how regional rail shrinks regions, right? How it makes a community that would either be a really long drive or a train trip that is on a local commuter line that requires a lot of planning because the times aren't as frequent, and so you have to make sure that it lines up with your high-speed rail departure, or it's just slow. If we can make that trip more reliable, more frequent, and faster, that impacts that door-to-door time, and it opens up more trips to be competitive. Because often this graphic is used to talk about, oh, here are the destinations that are accessible or that will be competitive from Chicago. But we also have to think about that not everyone lives right in downtown Chicago or lives right next to an L station with a 30-minute trip. And so if we can have upgraded regional rail service on Metra and some of those corridors, then we start talking about significantly more communities that are within a competitive, complete door-to-door time. So this is just some examples of what that what that looks like as far as sort of really shrinking the region. So on the left, we've got an image from the Toronto Go RER expansion project that is underway, and it looks at just how much more of the region is in that the sort of the band of green, the band of sort of navy green colors to olive green color to sort of right around yellow is really that sweet spot of trips that are that are significantly more reasonable time. And you can see on that bottom graphic that with electrification and with more frequent trains, how much more of the Toronto region is accessible in a reasonable amount of time, that 45 minutes to a little bit more than an hour timeline. Because again, often we see this graphic here on the right and thinking about, okay, well, high-speed rail is super competitive, but that graphic shows someone walking to the station, which is great in a lot of cities where it's very dense and there's a lot of people downtown. But how can we think about making high-speed rail competitive in regions that are a bit more spread out, and even in a region that has quite a few folks in walking distance or in a very short bus ride. There's still, how we make high-speed rail even more competitive and how we make that business case even stronger is by looping in more of the region. And so sort of some of what that looks like in Boston is significantly better travel times from major cities. So from Worcester, which is the second largest city in New England, you're talking about half the time. From Fitchburg, shaving 30 minutes off of that trip. From Lawrence, shaving half the time off of that trip. And again, with much more frequency. And also making a full transit trip even better, because again, we know that a lot of times when folks get into a car, yes, some folks will be driving to a high-speed rail station, but a lot of folks, when they get in that car, it's just an extra step. I have to pay for parking and how many days will the car be there and how much does that parking cost? It starts to add a lot of complexity to the trip. And so a lot of people will just say, well, if I'm already getting in the car, I'm going to just drive. And so again, how do we think about making that trip a lot easier? If they're able to walk to a commuter rail station or park in a much cheaper commuter rail lot and have a train journey either the entire way or most of that way, including that local trip. Again, that's another thing that makes high-speed rail even more attractive. So yeah, this is all about just imagining a better future. And so this is some awesome posters that are some of our graphic design team designed. I just wanted to sneak those in there because I think they're awesome and I always love to show them off. But yeah, so thank you all for listening. I'm really excited to answer some questions and have a wonderful conversation with you all.
All right. Well, thank you. This is a wonderful conversation already, I think. And I feel like I should say that this, for those who can see this Boston poster, I didn't just put this up today. I had the chance to live in Boston for about 10 years. And it's near and dear to my heart, but it's really thrilling to see this kind of vision for the city and the transportation for the region. So thank you, Jared, for the work that you're doing. And there's been, since you've been presenting, you probably haven't had a chance to keep an eye on the chat, but there's been some love for TransitMatters in there too.
Well, thank you.
And we also, we often, and this time is no exception, we have people interested in getting copies of the material. Yes. And so I wanted to just let everyone know that we always have a recording of these talks available within a few days that will be up on our site. You can go to hsrail.org/events. We'll have this one there as soon as we can. And we have probably 50 or 60 other talks like this there if you want to look through that whole library. Let's see, we've got lots of questions and I know more are coming in, so I'll do my best to keep up and choose well. But you mentioned, Jared, you mentioned, this picks up on the mention of all-day service, and Joshua asks, how do you define all day? Is that truly 24 hours or some other span of time? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, we think about it as around 4:35ish in the morning until a little bit past midnight. It is usually not best practice to have truly 24-hour, at least not all of the time, because you do need time for maintenance, and often people hold up New York City. Although we're in that case we're just talking about I guess they have 24-hour service on Long Island Railroad, but that infrastructure is not in not in good shape, and so I think there is that trade-off. But we think about it as that span, but I think obviously we're quite some time away from this happening, and I think if we've got that infrastructure in good shape and there is demand, I think we should certainly look at can they accommodate 24-hour service, if not every day, certain days of the week, but at least for now, our thought is let's start with that framework, and go from there. But really, when we think about all day, the main sort of thing we're saying when we talk about that is those gaps in the middle of the day that discourage parents and caretakers from being able to use regional rail, or discourage people who maybe work in tech, and their usual schedule is, I get to the office like around 10 or 11, but I may be working until 7 or 8 o'clock at night.
Okay, great. And we always have a lot of questions about, sort of geographic details of, whenever we have a talk like this. And so we've got a few of those here. Thomas asks, are there plans to cross the Charles River with regional rail or metro rail without having to go downtown? And for those not familiar with the city of Boston, I assume that means, sort of more or less asks about traveling north and south through the city without necessarily needing to go through downtown crossing.
Yeah. Right now, no, there is a plan to do something with, and I saw someone put this in the chat. There's a segment of track called the Grand Junction line, which, if you know anything about Boston geography, sort of at the edge of what I call tourist Boston, at the edge of right around BU, there's a line that kind of goes across the river there, and then goes through the edge of Kendall Square, and then kind of goes around East Cambridge, and then connects to North Station that way. That is such a giant question mark about how that gets used, and is it light rail? Is it a regional rail style service that is interlined, and trains run directly to Worcester and Points West, or is it a forced transfer? And I think there's just such a big question mark around that. Both because there's trade-offs to using different types of vehicles, some of which would not allow you to run trains through. It's also going to be severed for the better part of a decade or so, because of a highway project near there. And I think it's complicated around what's called reverse branching, where most branches are, you have a trunk in the city, in the core area, and then it splits into branches in the suburbs. There are places where you do reverse branching, where lines branch and go to different destinations in the core. There's pros and cons to doing that, but for folks coming in from Worcester and from those other areas, South Station and the downtown area, the center of gravity is close to South Station. So we'd have to sort of think long and hard about whether it makes sense to split that traffic and go to North Station, when a really well-timed and, if you can get the track alignment right, cross-platform transfer might provide folks with access to places like Kendall Square easier. So sorry, long way of answering. At least right now, no, but I think in the future, things like North-South Rail Link can help to solve some of that, and figuring out, are there creative ways of sort of getting folks from suburb to suburb, be that something Grand Paris style, be that activating old rail rights of way and doing some kind of circumferential train. I think I still said that wrong, or bus that connects folks without having to go into downtown Boston.
And you just touched on the link between North Station and South Station, and there's lots of interest in that in the questions and chat. Are there any updates on that possibility, or anything more to say about that?
I haven't heard any updates as of late. We are, our organization supports North-South Rail Link, but our focus has really been on getting the political will to electrify and to transform our system, because we see North-South Rail Link as the we see it as the icing on the cake for this, and we see it as really completing the system, but that we don't need the tunnel to get that started. And so we're just really super focused on that. But right now they're having conversations about, should we expand South Station, and our organization has been pushing back on that and has been really lifting up North-South Rail Link as something that we should, our thought is, well, first we should work on how do we operationalize this, right? We have systems, we have stations in Europe and in Asia that host high-speed rail trains departing with very, very decent frequency, 10-15 minutes or better, plus commuter rail line trains, or regional rail or suburban rail, whatever they call it there, departing with really good frequencies. And they do it with fewer tracks than what they have in Boston. And so our push is, first you need to reform your operational practices and make those better. You need to invest in infrastructure that breaks down less, so that you don't need flexibility and extra tracks just in case. And then you need to look at, what do you do for capacity? And could that be a modest expansion for South Station in the future? Perhaps. Certainly things like North-South Rail Link, which allow you to have the turning of trains around and those things that occupy a lot of space and time, to do those outside of the core. So that's sort of how we're thinking about North-South Rail Link. So I don't think it's coming up in the future. I don't think it's coming up anytime in the near future. And we don't have a ton of sort of official updates, but we have been really using the conversation about expanding expanding South Station to say there are better ways to do this, and one of those is through running.
Okay, great, thanks. And Jared, since you mentioned other cities, I'm gonna go to a comment and question from Ian, who says, first, thanks, Jared, really positive vision, and then asks, are there particular cities and municipalities around the world where you'd like to see Boston using as a regional or for regional commuter rail benchmarks to sort of match up what Boston and Massachusetts does to what's working well in these other places?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many wonderful places, and I think I don't know if there's any place that is absolutely completely perfect, and that every place does things differently because of the different geography, political geography, and sort of where populations are. So for me, really, it's a grab bag, right? It is the breadth of Spain's network, right? And going into more rural areas. And I know this might be a controversial thing, although maybe not among high-speed rail geeks. I mean, maybe I'm in good company. I don't know that you necessarily that it needs to be the some giant population to serve. If a roadway would also be very expensive to bring to some of these places, or expanding that roadway capacity would also be really expensive, then why are we thinking about rail in a different way? So yeah, places like that are great. And Spain has incredible connectivity in downtown Barcelona and Madrid to Cercanías and the other suburban train networks. Obviously, Tokyo, is just Japan, has incredible connectivity between the different and it's even more impressive in Japan, because all of these entities are private or semi-private. The high-speed rail operator and the suburban railways. There's really good connectivity there as well. There's some other places that are great. France has been really really incredible from a policy perspective in terms of what they've done with rail. Sorry, what they've done with the Air France and the air carriers, and saying, look, we've made too much of a good investment in this rail network, and we've even introduced low cost carriers, which is just such a really cool innovation to not only have the world famous TGV, which is still decently affordable, but to then also really throw a strong challenge to Ryanair and some of the low cost carriers by introducing services like WeGo. And in fact, really, when you think about the EU and those efforts, it's been really impressive to see that increased competition, and to see some of the different national carriers operating service in other countries, and how that's driving down the price, and how open access carriers are popping up in places like Italy, and really putting some positive pressure in terms of quality and price on Trenitalia.
Great. I've got a couple more geographic questions from people on the kind of north of Boston. Jim asks how the Downeaster train to Maine fits into this vision, and this question from Bill in Vermont, maybe kind of gets at the regional part of regional rail. Bill asks, what do you think of extending the Lowell line to Concord, New Hampshire? And he says, those of us living in northern New England don't expect service to sparsely populated areas, but it would be really helpful to be able to avoid I-93 south of Concord.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we think of regional rail as the down payment for both of those projects, both of those corridors. Obviously there's a different element there in that the state government, especially the famously anti-rail state government of New Hampshire, is there at play, and so there's only sort of so much Massachusetts can do. But we see the removal of the bottlenecks, we see the electrification as really key steps that capital corridor or service to Concord can plug into on the Lowell line, which is already a hell of a railroad. Mostly fairly straight alignment, not a ton of stops, so it's already built for really great express service. So we see that as a great down payment there. And then the same thing on the or similar thing on the service, the Downeaster, the service to Portland, Maine. That I think is a fantastic corridor for higher speed service, and again, unlocking the bottlenecks, some of which we're pushing the T to do, even in the short term. I don't think the Haverhill line is first up for electrification, but we're saying unlocking those bottlenecks, you can start to do that now, so that we can, I think if I could certainly see a world in which, if that service continues to do well, and if there's, some real momentum from, or real sort of attention from Amtrak, I could certainly see a bright line style, 125 mile an hour, interim service there, and then let's electrify, and then once we get the Haverhill line electrified, let's hopefully work on some politics in the New Hampshire State House, and let's get 145 mile an hour electrified railway there, and then keep on pushing. So absolutely, we love the work that the Northern New England Northern New England Intercity Rail Initiative has done, and we've often used that in our advocacy for the line between Boston and Springfield. And so we definitely support that vision, and we think that regional rail is can be an important building block on that, and how we expand service not just in the Boston area but all across New England.
Great. I have a few questions about technology here from a few people. From Bill Porter, one of our board members, he asks, is there a cost estimate for the electrification of the MBTA's diesel-powered system?
Yeah, the cost estimates, really range, and this is one that is, it's a complicated question, because it really relies on how much emphasis do you want to put on, or sort of how much emphasis or faith do you want to put into the ability for us to really reform some of our construction, engineering and design and political processes. But we think that the estimate could be as low as 5 to 8, 5 to 8 billion. The T's estimates are, considerably higher in the 30s range. So, as with anything, I don't know, and some people might get mad at me at this, but yeah, somewhere in the middle. But one of the things that we've really been trying to do is work on the business case to show that there is a cost to not doing it. Right, there is a cost to expanding, expanding highways to the extent that we can even do that in Massachusetts. There's a fairly strong sort of ban on highway widening or new highways within the core of the Boston region. There's a cost in terms of the air quality pollution, again, and not as much from the trains themselves, but from the cars, and from the fact that we're not reaching our EV targets anywhere close to we're not anywhere close to sort of being on target with EV adoption. And even then, there's a bunch of other things, from particulate matter to where the power is coming from. And so between the lost economic productivity from folks being stuck in traffic, or from low-income communities that are neither connected to higher paying jobs nor have the infrastructure that would attract high paying jobs. So that I think has been where we've been shifting a little bit more of our focus to, just because I think we've done some good work to show the range and to show what can be done with really effective project management, really effective construction, and looking at places where they have some of the same challenges, weird funky geography, old cities, old regions, high unionization, but they're still able to come in with significantly lower costs. So we pointed that out, and now we're really shifting to making the case to say, to a certain extent, it almost doesn't matter about the cost. We need to do this because this is what is good for mobility and for connectivity, and for our region. Let's work on lowering that cost, but we're really worried. We're really focused on explaining those benefits and trying to put a price tag on those benefits as well.
Okay. And a quick follow-up on that question about electrification. In that estimate that you gave us, Jared, is there an assumption that would be powered by renewable energy?
Yes, but that's not, that didn't sort of figure into the estimate. So I think we think about that as being sort of on Mass DEP or Eversource or National Grid's books, as far as sort of how they do that. Obviously, yes, we really want it to be renewable powered, but also thinking about just how ridiculously efficient rail is from a power perspective. It's the amount of people you're able to carry with just the amount of sort of people per sort of kilowatt hours just is really pretty dramatic. And so obviously let's make it renewable, but even in the short term, you're going to see massive efficiency and pollution benefits if we're able to really shift folks onto that rail system.
Okay, great. Thomas asks about your mention of EMUs. Have you locked in on an EMU type and brand?
No, I mean we're fairly sort of flexible on that. I mean, we definitely have a preference for in most cases for single level EMUs because of the because of the space benefits. We think that in a world in which you have services as low as every 15 minutes, 8 on some lines, we think a single level train that has the ability to either has the ability or has a mix of vehicles that have almost like a subway kind of style layout, because we're going to see some of these trips from some of these inner ring suburbs are going to be trips that are similar in duration to subway trips. We see that as a benefit. We see people being able to get on and off the train without stairs, and all the injuries that come from that being a benefit. And we've heard from people in the disability community that really don't love trains with stairs because they feel sort of ghettoized and they're just compartmentalized by the bathroom, and not able to really experience the train in the same way. So that's our, that's our preference. Obviously there are models like, what they have in San Francisco, with the flirt trains that are, that are great. And so, we're an advocacy organization. We're going to push for what we think is the best solution, but ultimately it's not up to us. But yes, I think the biggest thing is that, EMUs, the brand is far less important, but we think it is important that for regional rail, for trips that are, for these services that are going to be stopping frequently, the acceleration benefits of distributed power is really important. So the EMU is the most essential part, and then some of these other things really kind of fall out from there as far as priority.
Okay. And speaking of your advocacy work and the agencies that you need to influence, how far are these plans from reality? And a related question from Sadvita. What do you think are some of the biggest challenges for Massachusetts or the MBTA to realize this regional rail vision?
Yeah. It's in some ways it's hard to tell exactly sort of how far we are, because the the MBTA has not been very open about sort of where their plans are. But the good thing is that two of the lines that have been prioritized, the Providence line, which is also the Northeast corridor between South Station and Providence, and a few stops south of that, is mostly electrified. I think there would need to be some power upgrades, in order for more trains to handle, or in order for the corridor to handle more trains, and some of that is perhaps already being undertaken or explored by Amtrak because of the demands of the new Liberty fleet. But we don't think that will be some massive lift. Really, the big thing is going to be the trains. There are some stretches of track that need to be electrified. Platforms that Amtrak doesn't serve, stations that Amtrak doesn't serve south of Providence, that would need to be done. And then there's the Fairmount line, which is a short stretch that connects South Station to a neighborhood in the southern part of Boston and it goes a sort of a different route through Dorchester, through a Dorchester Mattapan, an environmental justice community that is really sort of in this rapid transit no man land between the Orange Line and the Northeast Corridor, which share a right of way, and the Red Line, which runs along the water. And so those are lines that that are not going to be nearly as difficult to electrify. And so I don't know where the plans are, but with attention and with political will, it should not be that hard to do it. But that gets to the second part of that question. It really is the political will, where we've gotten to a place where there's almost nobody at the State House who doesn't support regional rail sort of in concept, but Massachusetts has been plagued with this way of thinking for the last 30 years that we're Taxachusetts, and that high taxes is the reason that that folks are leaving Massachusetts, or that things aren't the way they should be. And so we have cut the we've cut the budget of the state, which has meant that the agency has less has less expertise, has less capacity to do these projects. And so really getting the legislature and the governor to understand that it takes investment to have a good, productive system. It takes investment to meet the climate change goals that the legislature and that the administration hoop and holler about and say that they really care about. It takes investment to reach equity goals, and to connect people to opportunity and to jobs, and to make a real impact on some of the housing challenges. And so that has really been the barrier. And I've seen some things in the chat about he doesn't care, all of that stuff. But the thing about the T is the T is not an entity, or sorry, the T is a entity made up of people. And so the T, it's not, I don't think we should be in the habit of saying, well, the T doesn't care about electricity, yada yada. There are people there at the T who don't care about it, and our mission as advocates is to either change their mind or change the people's minds who appoint those folks and who make the decisions, and either replace those folks or have that decision come from above, because that's, at the end of the day, it's the people that are there, and we need to empower the ones and give resources to the ones who are working on this, because there are people at the T who are trying to make this happen. And then there are other folks who are, who are not as helpful. And again, we convince them, or we, figure out how to push them aside and move forward. But I'm optimistic about this. I'm hopeful that we're making headway and making progress. And I've just seen so much incredible organizing that's happened, both from our group and from people inspired by this work, and building on the work of people like the Fairmount Indigo Collaborative that's been doing a lot of work around the Fairmount line even before we started doing this. So I think let's be clear-headed about the challenges, but I do want to challenge the negativity that's not going to get us to where we need to go. So let's think positively about how we can make this vision a reality.
And running with that, in terms of government and the investment that will be needed to make this a reality, where do you most need support and investment from? Does that need to come from the city, from the state, from some other level?
Come from the state. The message we have been really trying to drive home to state leaders and other people is, we can't wait for the federal government to save us. I mean, I think there are many grants and programs out there, and that's wonderful. But it's Washington is Washington, and the pendulum's going to swing every which way, and this and that. I'm sort of if anything, I'm optimistic about what we can do in Boston. I'm cynical about Washington, but also even with the resources in Washington, we really are pushing the state to do better, because if I'm in DC, if I'm at USDOT, why would I give Massachusetts money when they haven't raised any themselves? They don't have any skin in the game. The LA metro area is raising something on the order of, I can't remember, I keep hearing different numbers, but somewhere between 60 and $120 billion of their own money. Some of that is for highway projects but we'll put that aside. But they are putting real money on the table, and so we really need the state to put the money where their mouth is. We really need the state to invest in long-term sustainable funding sources for the T. The T is the only large agency that doesn't have dedicated funding for its capital budget. It's an ask from the legislature every time. It's bonds. It's all of these things except for a sustainable revenue source that can that can be used by the agency to plan and to know, okay, this is we've got a dependable funding source. We can start planning for this thing because we know that there's going to be funding. That has been one of the barriers to the T planning. And while I think it's a dumb game of chicken and the T just needs to blink and start planning for it, there's under some frame of thinking, you can't blame them, because they're like, well, why would we start doing all of this work for a system that the legislature hasn't told us how we're going to pay for? So that, I think, is the big thing that needs to happen, as well as a shift in thinking, a paradigm shift. We need to be talking about mode shift. I think we have reached in Massachusetts and in a lot of East Coast cities, or a lot of the cities where we're talking about high-speed rail very seriously, we've reached the limit of funding transit for other people. We have to start thinking about how are we having a conversation about mode shift, and how are we thinking about having the price of driving reflect reality, and how are we thinking about building transit that's not just good enough, not just, oh well, it's for transit riders, it's fine, let's just build the bare minimum. How are we building transit that is comfortable, that is reliable, that is beautiful, that also tries to work to solve other challenges that a region is facing, and again, build transit that will help to convince people to get out of their cars. Some of that is on the stick side too, but I think that carrot part is really really important. We've got to start thinking about how do we have transit that is not just a social service, not just for those people, not just to help drivers get downtown faster. How are we thinking about what highways are we going to demolish in the future because we no longer need them, because we've thought about how we're moving people by rail? What highway expansion projects and new runways do we need to cancel in the future because we have just removed we've just removed the short haul flight market. I was watching a video on Barcelona, or sorry, on Spain's system, and there are two flights between Barcelona and Valencia. Somebody's going to correct me if I'm wrong. It's either Madrid or but anyway, between either Barcelona or Madrid and Valencia, there's two flights a day because the rail is so cheap and so frequent and reliable. And so that's the framework we need to be thinking about.
All right. Well, that is a great place to end it. And unfortunately, since it's the top of the hour now, we will need to wrap this up. But thank you, Jared, for speaking today, and thanks to you and your team for all the great work that you're doing. We've had a lot of questions. We couldn't get to them all. I'm sorry about that. Got to as many as we could. So all I can say is that if you want to learn more about Transit Matters or to support their work, you can go to transitmatters.org, right?
Transit Matters. Is it .org.com? Yeah. Either way, I think it loops back there.
Okay, great. And if you would like to support the High Speed Rail Alliance, you can go to highspeedrail.us. We're all in this together, and thank you all very much for coming today.